To some other news now, and polls have opened in Iran for a special election to replace late President Ebrahim Raisi, who was killed in a helicopter crash last month. Iran's Supreme Leader, seen here, has cast his vote. Ayatollah Khamenei is the highest authority in the country and had broad control over selecting the 4 candidates who are running for president. He's called for a high turnout for the sake of the country's reputation. The vote for new political leadership in Iran comes amid domestic anger over a government crackdown on protests and tensions with Israel.
After 3 years of Ebrahim Raisi's hardline leadership, Iran's 61 million voters once again have a choice to vote. A poor economy, Western sanctions, and women's rights are among the most pressing issues.
Raisi put in a lot of effort for the economy, but on the ground, things didn't change much for the general public, and people were not happy. Near the time of the election, the hijab will be taken less seriously, but when the vote is over, things will go back to the way they were. The young people are not allowed to remove their headscarves.
It's the theocratic regime of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei that holds ultimate power in Iran. But the Iranian president sets domestic policy and has some influence over foreign policy. Presidential candidates usually ally themselves with the conservative Supreme Leader. But in an effort to garner support from a public that largely feels alienated and dissatisfied, the candidates have campaigned by publicly criticizing the government. One of the presidential candidates is Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf, a former commander of the Revolutionary Guard. He has promised Iranians to revive the economy, which has been battered by Western sanctions.
We will definitely compensate for the gap between the inflation rate and wages by raising your wages and providing you with necessary goods and staples in such a way that your dinner table will never shrink.
Another leading candidate is Saeed Jalili. The ultra-conservative is the former chief nuclear deal negotiator and wants to press ahead with Iran's long-running anti-Western policy. The sole reformist candidate is Dr. Masoud Pezeshkian. He has been the most critical voice against the mandatory hijab and the morality police. He also favors engagement with the West.
Just by the way we can talk to each other, we can also learn to talk to our neighbors and the rest of the world. We cannot fight everyone. We shouldn't fight. We should not show aggression to others.
Human rights organizations criticize the fairness of Iranian elections, and reversing historically low levels of voter turnout remains a big challenge in this election as well.
I'd like to welcome Sara Bazoobandi, a research fellow at the German Institute for Global and Area Studies. So we've learned just there in that report a little bit about some of the candidates. Which one would you say has the best chance of becoming the next president of Iran?
Thank you for having me. The short answer to that is that nobody really knows. The election has been, the vetting process has been extremely engineered. The experience of previous elections show that the state in Iran has adopted a series of try and error strategies to engineer and to manipulate presidential election. 2009 crisis showed that the regime, when it comes to tolerating certain voices within the society, is quite harsh and quite unaccepting. 2013 election was also another indicator that when the regime finds itself in a very complicated international crisis, maybe puts a so-called pragmatic face to the front of the administration, to face with the international community, especially with the West. This time around, we don't really know what exactly is the overall strategy, but I would imagine that somebody like Pezeshkian and his views are less tolerated from from within the deep state and specifically the office of Supreme Leader personally. He may have been thrown in the pool of the nominees because he has the capacity to drum up some support and encourage people to go to the ballot boxes, which is the most important issue in this election. But ultimately, I think somebody maybe like Alibov is the more desirable candidate because of his security and his military background. And there has been rumors that he has been considered as a candidate that can handle the transition of the Supreme Leader's power to his successor, because Supreme Leader is quite old. It might be the case that during the first presidency of whoever wins this ballot box, there would be a transition of power, and somebody like Alibov ticks all the boxes in order to control the order and business as usual in Iran for that transition.
And would this be one of the main roles that the president would have? And just to put a finer point on it, could you give us some context about how important it is who becomes president, given that the highest authority in the Iranian system is the Supreme Leader?
Yes, I think domestically and internationally, there is very little hope that anybody in the presidential palace would be capable of shaking and moving things and changing Iran's overall strategy. Again, because of what you exactly rightly mentioned, the extreme control of Supreme Leader over all affairs of the country. And that has been evident. For example, somebody like President Rouhani put somebody like Mohammad Javad Zarif in the foreign ministry. Zarif was the smiley face who went and eloquently spoke in the language of the world, cut the JCPOA deal, but then ultimately he went back after his term in office was ended, and he gave an extensive interview and said that basically I wasn't the decision maker. I was just doing merely what I was told. So we have been there and done that, and we have seen that the president and administration have very little power. But if there was a coincidence between this term of a president and the transition of power to the next Supreme Leader, that would be the crucial point for the next president.
And so how much, then, these issues that we also heard about that Iranian voters are concerned with, the economic crisis, restrictions on civil liberties, women's rights, these kind of things, how much do they play in this election?
It's obvious that in every election campaign, the candidates most likely make promises that there is very little chance that they would be delivered. It's the same in Iran. It's the same in various other parts of the world. Issue of hijab, issue of economic pressure has always been used by all the presidential candidates from the time of Ahmadinejad, for example, in early 2000s. He came out in the first election campaign in his first term and said, well, our problem is not really women's hijab. But then when he came to the office, he strengthened and he funded and he extended the so-called morality police that were on the streets of the country harassing women. So these promises have been given before, but there is very little stamina, very little willingness to actually implement them and to deliver them. They are mainly just to drum up support, as I mentioned, and bring people to the ballot boxes. Economic situation also is the same thing. People have been under a lot of economic pressure. There is very little that any government in Iran could do unless they normalize their relationships with the international community. And as long as they don't have the power to do that, economic situation will remain the same.
Sara, thank you so much for your analysis there. That is Sara Bazoobandi, Research Fellow at the Giga Institute.